Put your hands together up for Finley.
Thank you for the introduction. Yes, don't mind the cameras today. Thank you for joining, Carl. Don't mind the cameras today. This is my video editing practice because I do this for TESOL now, so I need some trial runs, so I'm doing this today. So don't mind that. Today I was going to talk about this, connected to this theme we're doing in CPD this semester, excessively engaging ways to open class. I did that 2 years ago. It was a nice presentation. But I think more prescient over the last few weeks, just talking to teachers and things that I'm passionate about, I decided to erase this topic, and I got permission from Reggie to change my topic, because I think this will be more useful for everybody here. This one is something I'm quite passionate about, how to get your students talking, not just in class or being engaged, but in groups, which is something I found challenging, not just as a teacher, but I also found it very challenging as a person. When I was in high school, I can tell you I was very, very shy. That is absolutely true. When I was in my classes, I found it so difficult to talk in groups. I was the student you did not want. I was the one who would not talk. No matter what you tried, I would not talk. And I would always hear this question, probably every week: why don't you speak? Why don't you speak? Why don't you speak? That's ingrained into my brain now. So I always felt a little bit outside the group in high school. That changed. I worked very, very hard to overcome that. The teachers helped, of course, but also my inner reflection to just become more confident, develop those skills that I didn't have before. So I did eventually overcome it. It took a long time. But now when I became a teacher, I decided I want to use some of those ideas that I developed on an individual level to also help my students, because our students can be very shy, especially speaking in English, not just talking one-on-one to the teacher, but definitely in pairs, in groups. I probably predict in any class, some of you have at least one or two students who really find it uncomfortable, exactly like how I used to be. What I found last time I worked at Woosong, I could quite easily, eventually, get my students doing nice role plays. So that would be the hotel manager and the customer handling a complaint. I could get them doing that. I could get them writing and speaking dialogues. No problem, they were engaged. I could get them doing interviews, writing questions, preparing their answers, these kind of rote responses. I could get them doing surveys, walking around the class. And in some ways, I felt very, very happy about that. I felt like a really good teacher, and I think I was. These are all ingredients we need in our classrooms to make them engaging, exciting, have that variety. But still, as a teacher, what really frustrated me is I was reluctant to get my students kind of just talking by themselves in groups, because I believed they would start using their cell phones, they would just speak in Korean, or I would have half the class just kind of folding their hands, their arms, and not wanting to do it. And so I had to learn a lot about how I might get them speaking in groups. This was my problem, because I think it is really important that when our students leave our classes, go into the next semester's classes, or go out into the real world, not just have the grammar, the vocabulary, know how to answer questions, but feel comfortable actually speaking in pairs, speaking in groups, without necessarily the teacher intervening. I didn't want them to have this idea. So over the last few years, I've worked very, very hard to try and solve this problem, a variety of strategies, so that I can get all my students comfortably speaking in groups, group discussions, without me having to get involved too much. So before I share my strategies, my ideas that I've worked in my classes, what I want you to do is talk to people around you for 3 minutes. How do we get our students talking in groups? What works in your classes? How have you found a way around this problem that we all experience? I'll give you 3 minutes. Talk to your group. Yeah. Thank you. So before I start sharing some of my ideas that have worked in my classes, any ideas? How do we get our students talking in groups? Greg?
You need to give them a clear definition of what they're supposed to be doing in the group.
Yeah.
Especially with our gen classes, many of these classes are made up of students who are all in the same major, meaning they're working in groups all the time already. If you don't assign them group partners, they probably already have group partners in mind. And so in that case, it's just as easy as giving them a goal, giving them an amount of time, and then starting them off. Usually I end up yelling at, "She's up," when we start.
I think, yeah, clear goals, clear instructions, maybe even model what you're looking for. Any more ideas?
After the group, they're going to share it with the class. That gets them a little more motivated.
Oh, yeah, some kind of accountability factor. If you said what you're doing, you're going to be showing to the class or presenting to the class, right. Oh, this could be embarrassing if I don't do it. I guess that could be part of it. Thinking about my ideas, the first one is almost like a mini review of what I did last year. In my experience, as I said, I was very, very shy. And I think what helped me overcome that is realizing I don't have to do all the speaking. In a conversation, I can ask questions, I can use all these skills to get the other person speaking. And that eventually helped me build confidence when I was very shy. And so I do think if we want really good group discussions, we should be teaching these conversation skills. Before I just go quickly recap each one, I'll show you a video. I quickly edited one together on Saturday. I was trying to pick out the skills they were using that we taught in class. Let's have a quick listen to a group of students. So this was an example, as we all know here at Woosong, those are some of the best students you can get at Woosong, culinary students. But I have taught these skills not just to culinary students at Woosong, but to all levels at a different university. And I have managed to reproduce the similar kinds of group discussions again and again, not just with high-level students, but with low-level students. Because learning these skills doesn't necessarily require amazing grammar or vocabulary. The first skill, of course, the most basic one, greetings, how to say hello here. They all did the same one, but I teach the gestures of greetings, formal and informal greetings. Reactions, what is a reaction? That would be a good example, yes. Oh, today's my birthday. Not really, but today's my birthday. Wow, that's fantastic. If you want to be great communicators, we usually use reactions, or we want to develop at least the skill. Follow-up questions. If you want to keep a group discussion going, you need to keep asking questions and reacting to what's going on. So I really, what I've noticed with Korean students, any level, if you get them working on this, they are amazing at writing follow-up questions. I don't know why, for some reason they have a natural built-in gift to write follow-up questions over and over again. Reactions requires a lot of work, but follow-up questions they definitely have. Repair questions, what is a repair question? In a conversation, in a group discussion, if there's a problem, what would be an example of repairing the problem? This would be, let's say, one classmate is really nervous, they're speaking very quietly, and then their classmate says, hey, please speak a little bit louder. Or please slow down, please don't speak so fast. Or if a word their classmate uses and they don't know what it means, teach them, hey, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. Rather than they translate into Korean. Buying time. Even if I were to throw you all into a group discussion now and said, hey, talk about climate change, go. That would be very difficult to do without some kind of preparation, or you at least need to buy time. Simple example, expression is let me see, hold on a moment. Teach that idea of giving them time to think about what they're going to say in their discussions. How to express opinions. Might have been difficult to hear in the video, but in my case, in my opinion, in my view, and then agreeing and disagreeing. And I also teach disagreeing politely as well. I think that's a useful skill. Turn taking. One thing we don't want in our group discussions is one student taking all the limelight or one student completely invisible. So I do teach the skill of managing the group, taking turns, how to do it. Also circumlocution. What is circumlocution?
Trying to find a different way to say it.
Yeah, because we don't want, this is really the problem with group discussions. You'll have some students, they won't know what something means, they translate into Korean. I don't want them doing that because when they graduate and if they go to other countries, they can't do that. I teach them to do around speaking, using synonyms, antonyms, using gestures to explain themselves. And of course, ending a conversation, how to say goodbye. That's why I use that timer, so they can practice that. There's one more important thing. If we are doing long group discussions, you don't necessarily want them only talking on one topic. So changing topics. How do we change topics? What kind of expressions do we use? So imagine there's a lull in a conversation. There's that awkward silence. What would somebody say? So, anyway, by the way, that reminds me, I teach them that skill because I want to avoid those problems in the conversation. As we saw in this first example, setting time limits, I think, works really well. When I was a very shy student, if the teacher said, okay, just talk, it felt like it would be for eternity. There's no end in sight. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. If you set a time limit, they know, maybe it's going to be awkward for 20 minutes, but after that, it's going to be over. It is finite. There is a deadline on it. So setting time limits, I can now get not just my culinary students, also my hotel management student, and I think even to some extent my pre-level students now, getting long discussion times, up to 20 minutes. By the end of the semester, I want them to be able to do 30 minutes, 1 hour, without me having to get involved. I think that will be one of the best ways for them to learn the vocabulary grammar, just constant practice. And, we have a Windows problem. Let me get rid of that. There we go. Also, if we are going to think about topics for them to talk about, we need to find interesting topics. Anybody teaching this book? What do you think about this book? I think it's not too bad. My philosophy is not to, take the textbook and put it in the paper shredder. I've never been that kind of teacher. I've always seen it as a springboard. You've got your topic, and then you modify it. You take what is interesting and useful for your students, and that is what you use in the classroom. So really, I think it's about cherry picking. Some textbooks are terrible. We don't want to be doing everything in there. Take what's good and throw out the rest. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Also, as I was saying, people need time to prepare what they are going to say, what they are going to speak about in their discussions. And so if I'm going to have a long group discussion, 20 minutes, I will give them time to prepare. And so these are the kind of worksheets I will give them. You'll see this is a topic, but what is here? It's a blank canvas. I don't necessarily want that specific question in the textbook. That's very boring. I want them to come up with their own questions, their own ideas on that topic. So here was animals, maybe the environment. And when they do that, then I will give them some time to prepare. And rightly or wrongly, I will say, okay, this is your group. Of course, it's random groups. I'll show you later. Random groups. I'll say you've got 5 minutes to prepare for your group discussion. And now I will let them, in that preparation time, use Korean, do anything they want to get ready for that long discussion. It's strategy, it's planning, it's negotiating what they're going to talk about. And I always found when I do this preparation time and I put them in groups, it does build some very good rapport among the students because they see there's this mission impossible task, something difficult is coming. We are going to have to work together to solve this problem. No one's going to be here to help us. So I've always found that. What I've still found, though, is even if we teach the skills, even if we choose the most amazing topics we've ever seen in a classroom, you still might get 1 or 2 students who are still a little bit shy like I was and don't want to speak. And so I've had to rack my brain around that. How do I solve that problem if it's not working? Because they would still view a group discussion as a very scary thing to do, like a horrible exam, something to dread. That would be their reaction. And I think part of the reason is sometimes in a classroom, when I was very shy, I was very self-conscious. And when I was speaking in the classroom, I was always worried about what my classmates were thinking of what I was saying. It was just so much of the spotlight was there, I couldn't speak. It was very difficult. And I think we need to avoid our classrooms feeling like that scientific laboratory where everything is being judged. We are subjects for experiments. I think we have to change the atmosphere in the classroom. We have to make it more relaxed, a place where they want to speak, not a place where they fear this judgment. And so let's move on to another short discussion question. How do we facilitate a comfortable speaking environment in our classrooms? I've noticed this can help a lot with those students who are still a little bit shy. Even if we teach the skills and have interesting topics, this can also make a huge difference. So again, a few minutes, talk to somebody around you. The speaking environment itself, how do we make it more comfortable? Thank you, thank you. Any suggestions? How do we make the classroom just a more comfortable speaking environment? Any suggestions?
I think we should play games.
Games can help, yes, depending on what kind of game, and if it's definitely getting them speaking, that will work. What kind of game? Yeah.
The general principle of games is that we do not play a game, but a game plays us. Like we're playing basketball and we have the chance, we lift our hand, right? The game lifted our hand. So if you get it where they're thinking about the game and the game is causing them to act in a certain way, they're actually not thinking about the language at all.
I think that's one of the keys, yeah, just help them forget that they're in this environment, that's a classroom. Just kind of, they don't feel like they're being judged, yeah.
Also, another thing I like to do with my students is help them build confidence about speaking. Part of it is one thing I've been doing for the presentations, not sure how successful it is I've been teaching them how to project.
Project their voice?
Yeah, project, like this is my normal speaking voice, and this is my projecting voice. And it's not angry or yelling, it's just louder. And I've been teaching them how to do that.
Yeah, I think that would be useful, and also with skill. Skills help the game. Speaking about what I've experimented with in my classes, I actually just thought, you know what, I don't want this to be a classroom for this activity, or even this class. I want to find a way to overcome that. And so I've experimented with different scenarios, not role plays, but trying to just change the environment of the classroom. One thing I did try, I think some people here probably taught the widgets book at Woosong a number of years ago. One thing I did take from that is they had a water cooler conversation activity. And then years later, I remembered that and I thought, how can I get students out of their seats, talking to each other in groups in what feels like a natural setting? And so I couldn't bring in lots of water coolers, that's a problem. I printed out A4 pieces of paper and I put on different parts of the wall, water cooler pictures, A, B, C, and then randomize the groups. And I would say, hey, go have a 10-minute conversation. Just use English, any topic, I don't mind, water cooler. And I was explaining this is an informal conversation. You can talk on anything you want to talk about as long as it's in English. And I found that worked even with my low-level students. The big one that I always like to use, that's the students talking. What I like to use is, what's very popular in Korea, the coffee shop. And so I'd like to recreate that in my classroom, particularly when they're speaking. So for example, I play music. How does music help, do you think? It's not just because it's good music, but I think it does something else that's very important. It relaxes you, that's one. Takes time? Or?
Takes up the dead time.
Yeah, maybe fills in the silence. For me, that was the big one. Being a shy student who really feared what people were thinking of what I was saying. If you play music at a certain volume, not too loud, that can be a fine balance, but the other groups cannot hear what you are saying. If it's just silent, then you could, I guess, listen to your other classmates in other groups and you'd feel a little more self-conscious. Playing music, you think, well, maybe my students can't hear what I'm saying so much. It masks what you're saying, and you feel a little bit more relaxed, more comfortable. I don't know why they do it in Korean coffee shops. Maybe it's something similar, I'm not sure. Also, I have experimented by bringing real tea. Now, not expensive coffee, I'm not rich by any means, but I have brought very cheap tea. You can get those boxes of tea. They're like 3,000 won, 100 packets. Get some cheap paper cups and say, okay, for the first half of class, we're playing some music. You can talk in anything you want in English. Just use those skills. Here's your tea. And I usually let them leave the classroom for 30 seconds, get that hot water, and come back. And then I play the music, I set the timer, and now I say, you're in the coffee shop, you're in the tea room. Just speak, go. And I found with any level, any class, it's always worked. They just feel incredibly relaxed doing that. So I do recommend trying that. What is the teacher's job? So what we don't want is our students are in group discussions, having a great time, and then the teacher is not doing anything. What's the teacher's job now? Monitoring. I don't believe in heavily interrupting our students. I want to get them fluent and build that confidence. So usually when they're talking in groups, I don't really get involved too much. I'll be walking around with my notepad. Anything interesting or mistakes that everybody's making, I'll be jotting down notes. And then after the group discussion, I will bring it to the whiteboard, the projector, and then we'll talk about it together. We'll figure it out together after their conversations. The only time I do interrupt is with skills. Sometimes, not very often, once they practiced, it doesn't happen. But the first few classes, there might be that silence where the students are staring at each other. And I will walk over and say, so, anyway, and they go, anyway, what are you doing this weekend? Instantly it gets them back into the conversation. So I don't tell them what to say, I just tell them the skill. That has worked for me. We don't have too much more time, so this won't take very long. We do have some flexibility over quizzes here at Woosong. How can we use quizzes? So usually a quiz is a written assignment, 10 questions. How can we use a quiz to promote group speaking? I found this has made a big difference for some students. What can we do? Just talk to somebody for maybe 1 minute, because we don't have much more time. Not everybody does quizzes. This semester, actually, I was teaching the skills. I was producing these maybe relaxing environments for speaking, but I was not doing speaking quizzes. I used to do them all the time at my last university. It was on the curriculum. I had to do them, so I would do speaking quizzes. This time, it's not on the curriculum. I thought, well, maybe it's not necessary. I discovered I was wrong when a few weeks ago I had severe laryngitis, the second time I've had it in my career, and I could not speak. And I was thinking, well, I don't really want to do a makeup class because I have laryngitis. I can still go in the classroom. So I wanted to get my students doing all the speaking that day. And so I presented the instructions on the projector, and I did a kind of quiz I used to do at my old university. And I was sitting down with each group, assessing what they're writing, saying they will not get a quiz that's necessarily part of their grade, but I'm going to give very specific feedback on their individual speaking performances. And I had 2 students in my hotel class who, even though I was trying everything, 2 of them were speaking, but just not really at an equal contribution time with the other group members. And it was only when I had this laryngitis and I did this speaking quiz day, those 2 students, it was like a jump start for those 2 students. They thought, this is a quiz, I might be being graded. Suddenly they were talking in the group. Suddenly they were willing to get involved. And I think the reason is this. I think if we really want to motivate our students to do the things that they find really difficult, then their grade has to be on the line a little bit. Thinking back to when I was very shy, I was age 17 years old, and I was in a communication skills class, and a group discussion was on that curriculum. I had to speak in that group discussion or I was failing the class. And it was such a nightmare, I didn't think I could do it. And I did manage to speak, against everything that I wanted, it felt natural to speak 2 or 3 sentences. And after that, suddenly I realized, it wasn't the end of the world, it wasn't such a nightmare. Now I can speak even more. And that was the start of it. And I think that will help your students. I also think quizzes, assessment can build even more rapport between your students. If they're just doing kind of group discussions where it's just fun, that's one thing. But if it's an assessed group discussion, it feels a little bit like they're going to battle. There's that mentality that we need to work together. Our grade is important. We need to get out of this classroom and start figuring this stuff out. And I've noticed that just on a little bit of research I've been reading as well, that can have huge benefits for building rapport in the classroom. So I have done speaking quizzes in my previous university, the water cooler quiz, where they had a water cooler. I've done the coffee shop. I've even done a British pub quiz. I didn't bring beer. I gave them tea, and I just played, actually, Oasis music. And I set out the classroom, the layout, to look like it had a bar, and I put pictures on the tables, so they felt like, a little bit like they're in a pub. Brought back some nice memories. And it was one of the best classes I had at that university. It was a 2-hour class, just in a British pub, and they were speaking the whole time. It was great. Don't forget that randomizing your groups is essential. If you want every student to talk in any group in your class, if you're not randomizing the groups, there'll be times when you put them in the group and they won't necessarily speak because they're uncomfortable. You have to get over that barrier by constantly randomizing until eventually it feels perfectly natural and they have connected to everybody. I think Daniel did some ways to do that very quickly. I use this website, aschool.o's random pair. That works very fast to me. I think Robert on the CAS, you have something there that does the same thing. So quickly randomizing groups can help a lot. Thinking about speaking quiz rubrics, I like rubrics for quizzes that don't necessarily focus on things that are really, really difficult to improve quickly. So on my speaking quiz rubrics, I wouldn't necessarily have grammar or vocabulary yet, because I just want them to focus on the skills that they can quickly develop. So just giving a greeting with a gesture, they get the points. Giving a farewell, reacting, follow-up questions, just trying to speak for an equal time in their groups, I found to be a very good idea. And if you're doing these speaking quizzes, you can keep adding layers of complexity. So you've got your skills. For this one, I took away greetings, farewells. They got that. That's easy now. They do it every time. And then I add more, changing topics, how many topics, taking turns. At my last university, I could also control exam rubrics, so I would have an even longer one. But I think at Woosong, we can still do it on speaking quizzes if we really want to promote group speaking. Don't forget that all of these strategies that I have thought about so much do not exist in a vacuum. Everything Ranley was talking about in the previous presentation is extremely important. Everything you'll hear about classroom management is still important. Encouraging your students, not being a horrible, strict teacher is important. As I said, still having classroom management if they are not willing to speak in groups, just reminding them that it's part of their grade, participation. Not necessarily always with a stick, but sometimes using the carrot as well. In fact, more of the carrot, I would say. But I have found that group discussions, compared to when I didn't do them and now that I do them a lot, the students, when they leave the class, I honestly believe their happiness level, their contentment, their satisfaction is much, much greater than when they weren't doing it. They start the class fearing group discussions, and by the end, they actually really enjoy them. It's their favorite part of the class. So that would be a good incentive to, if you haven't tried mastering these group discussions, really see if you can do it, because I think the benefits are there as soon as you start doing it. And don't forget that our classes are English language classes, but you can't really learn a language divorcing it from communication skills. And I think if we want our students to be great at English language, we also need to give them great communication skills. And speaking in groups is a very important communication skill, as I've discovered. Before we go, let me just quickly play you 1 minute of one more clip, just to show you a little bit more from my students, to show you what it can look like in your classroom. The audio's not great on this video. I was still practicing with the camera, but you'll see the kind of dynamic that's going on. So I'll very quickly show this one. So there we go. I think if you can recreate this kind of environment, your students will appreciate it. Thank you.